Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Chisholm, and I am a current political analytics student. You know, I remember when I first came, I was excited. I learned about the conference. I came last year, and I remember leaving so happy and so hopeful about the future and learning something I've never had experience in. And I hope that after this conference, you guys leave the same and even feeling better. So I'm happy to introduce to you all the future of polling, the panel. For our moderator, we have Doug Usher. He is the partner of Forbes, Tate, and Partners. Please let's clap for him.
Yeah.
And then we also have Wes Anderson. He is the partner of OnMessage Public Strategies. Please let's clap for him as well. We also have Michael Miller, the Associate Professor and Chair of Political Science at Barnard College. Please let's clap for him. And then we also have Molly Murphy. She is the President of Impact Research. Please let's clap for her. And then over to you, Mr. Usher. Thank you all so much.
Great, thank you. Is it everyone can hear me? Excellent. So thank you all for being here. We decided to do something in a little bit of a different format this year. We issued the one slide challenge, which is we asked every one of our participants today, people that will be on our panels, to give one slide. It could have a lot of data, it could have a single word, it could have a picture that will make a point that they think is important in politics, in political analytics today. And I did that for two reasons. One is so that we have some content, but second, so that we didn't get bored by 30-slide presentations. So I'm not sure who's first, but I'm going to push the next slide, and whoever comes up first. But just to give a little bit more detail here, Molly is one of the top Democratic pollsters, presents regularly to the House and Senate caucuses, as well as to presidential elections. And Wes is one of the top Republican pollsters and has worked closely inside and outside the Trump orbit as well. So I wanted to make sure you saw we have a full panoply of and range of opinions when it comes to polling here. And I just bring up Michael Miller, he's an academic, right down the middle, so.
Extreme moderate.
Okay, so I think that's you,
me.
Wes. And you gotta.
Oh, there it is. Okay, so the one slide challenge here. As a pollster, I thought that this, just full disclosure, I was looking for sensational little factoids here to make my point. About media consumption, that's a Nielsen study, how since 2003, and really it's the smartphone that has driven that, has gone up 64%. That second one says Forbes, but it's an Ad Age study. It says where the average American's exposed to 6,000 plus impressions of advertising a day these days, and that has probably gone up almost 100-fold in the last 50 years. 88% of Americans tell Nielsen that they're using a second screen while watching something else. And then last is this Microsoft study. No, I'm not going to the veracity of the study. I don't know, but it makes my point. So I included. They did a study of attention span, and they said that Gen Z has an attention span of about 8 seconds. And they pointed out from some other study that some biologist did that the average goldfish has an attention span of 9 seconds. So again, I was intentionally being sensational there. I don't know how that holds up in the lab, but that for polling presents, it gives you an overview of where we're at. And I say mission impossible, but it is possible, and we do it. How do you get average Americans to focus and on politics for some period of time to talk to you about what they believe and what motivates them? I say 18 minutes. We can have a huge debate about that. It's shrinking quickly, and 18 may be too long now, but we still try to stretch phone interviews to 18 minutes. There is, we still find today, it may be more like 17 or 16, there is a cliff in which the hang-ups after that just start skyrocketing. So you have a modicum of time, and all of that presents, is continue to put pressure on the industry at a time when the demand for opinion research, good for Molly and I, is at an all-time high. I mean, everybody wants opinion research, corporate America and certainly politics in particular. And they want it to be accurate. And that is happening at a time where the American attention span is shrinking dramatically. And so what we do in that context to gain accuracy is critical. And look, there are two pieces, there are two sides of opinion research. Both of them are absolutely important. Number one is accuracy. If you don't know the landscape you're trying to affect and you can't measure it correctly, then you'll make strategic mistakes, tactical and strategic mistakes. So accuracy matters a great deal. But secondly, inside that, and this is where the art runs headlong into the science, which is it insightful? Anybody can put, I say anybody, it's not true. If you spend all your time making sure that you learn how to take accurate surveys and that you've got a methodology that's nearly bulletproof, because there's no such thing as bulletproof methodology, but all you're asking is the ballot test and a couple other key demos, there's not really anything insightful about what you're asking. And so the other piece, the art side, which Molly's very good at, by the way, is designing questions that fit within the framework of a shrinking attention span that actually draw out insight. So that's really, I think, if you're looking at what's the difference between the guys who are doing it right and the ones who aren't, it's the ability to balance those two things to produce accurate data that actually is insightful as well.
Excellent. We're gonna go through all three of these. So
that's mine. All right, so mine's a little different because I'm an academic and primarily work on voting rights. So I work a lot with voter files, trying to figure out how changes to the election regulatory environment affect people. And I was sitting in my office on Tuesday evening with no idea what I'm going to put on my one slide and got a gift from the President of the United States via an executive order issued Tuesday night that will do several important things. It first will decertify all election machines in the United States. It will give DOJ access to all American voter files, and will require what we call in the biz documentary proof of citizenship to register to vote. Now, that usually means a birth certificate, a passport, something else. When you parse this particular executive order, it is just a passport. So this is going to get immediately struck down by some district court. But assuming it passes, I thought, let's look at what this is actually going to do. So we know from litigation and a number of other surveys that the effective rate of non-citizen voting in America, because it is illegal and a felony committed in the broad light of day that creates literally a forensic record when it is committed, vanishingly small, probably fewer than 300 cases in any given election out of 180 million votes cast. But what this law and those like it, there's a law moving through the House next week called the SAVE Act, if you're following that, which it's a looser version of what the president is attempting here. What we want to ask is how much bathwater, or how much baby is getting thrown out with the bathwater on this. And so when we make a move, what I've done here is just smashed two polls together, the American National Election Study from 2024, the preliminary file, as well as the EVES file, which is government curated statistics on voter registration. Now, it's not just new voters who register. It's anytime you move, you also re-register. And that is when you're going to touch the government here and be asked for a passport. So how many times did that happen in the last midterm election of 2022? 81 million times. What is the rate of passport possession in America? Overall is 52%. The rub here, though, is that the rate of passport possession among Republicans is significantly smaller than among Democrats. It's 58.7% for Democrats compared with 42.7% for Republicans. So this is going to, if we just look at it straight up, my best guess at how many citizens this would stop from voting in the next election is 38.8 million. But because of disproportional registration rates, more people have been registering as Republicans lately, coupled with disproportionate rates of passport non-possession among Republicans. This is going to bear substantially harder on Republicans. The last thing I'll say about it, I believe it's facially unconstitutional, but It also contradicts the so-called motor voter law that Congress has enacted and several Supreme Court decisions. But gaming it out about how it's likely to play out, it will be struck down in federal courts, but it's likely that a number of local or state level election officials will say, well, the president has ordered this, so I'm going to do it. Those are likely to be in Republican-led states. So now we have a triple compound here that's going to disenfranchise Republican voters. So for folks who are tied into Republican politics, I think this is a really important aspect of this messaging. This law and the SAVE Act are likely to bear much more heavily on Republicans than Democrats.
And now we have a question we know that people are going to have to ask on their polls moving forward.
Yes.
Do you have a passport? Next one.
Great.
All right.
Thank you so much. So I want to talk a little bit about how and when data gets used effectively by campaigns and the thought process that political practitioners like myself and Wes often use when we are engaging with a campaign. So first is we are at a point where there is more data than ever at the disposal of campaigns. Some of that is polling data, there's analytics data, there's voter file analysis, growing AI. There's just a lot of inputs that a campaign has access to compared to even 5 years ago and certainly 15 years ago. Knowing what to do with that data is a critical strategic imperative for campaigns. Not all data is good, and even if the data is good, meaning accurate, meaning well collected, it doesn't necessarily mean that that data is useful in the pursuit of what the campaign is trying to get out of this. So one is data is not a replacement for critical thinking. And I say that because oftentimes it can be used as a mask for it. Well, we have data that says this, and therefore we should just proceed. Second, in order to figure this out, you have to know what you're testing for. The worst thing a campaign can do is go on a fishing expedition, and unfortunately it does happen all too often, and it's often the job of the pollsters to try to put the brakes on that. But as Wes already said in his remarks, you really can get information that is not that insightful out of your polls. And even if it's not limited to just the horse race, which I'll talk about in a moment, if you are just asking questions out of curiosity, you're just going to have a lot of muck. It's not going to help you build out a blueprint. It's not going to help you figure out how you're going to win the race or build up the profile of your candidate or combat a negative. And I have had many clients start out by saying, well, let's do the poll and see what we find out, and then we'll make a decision. And you can't write a poll when you don't know what decision you're trying to answer for. So you always, as a practitioner, need to have a clear sense of what you are testing for, and it has to be more specific than, I want to win this race, right? There are 1,000 different ways to approach that crosscut. It needs to be much more targeted to what is underlying and how you feel like you're going to get to that outcome. The next piece is it's not about the horse race. It's so funny that Wes made that point because the thing that I say all the time is for a pollster, your head-to-head is one of the least interesting numbers in a poll. It's the number that the campaigns care about. It's certainly the number the candidates care about. It's the number the press cares about, but it is not the number that the pollster tends to care about. That is a byproduct of other things under the surface, both in the electoral landscape and also within the poll, if you're doing it right, that will move if you are addressing other underlying issues. It could be underlying weaknesses that your candidate possesses or that their party affiliation possesses. It could be national headwinds, an inflationary environment, and how that is impacting people, their perceptions of how that's being handled. Those are the numbers, those are the sort of metrics that pollsters are looking at because they know if we're able to move those, the vote will go along with it, that the vote is often linked to other things. And that's not going to be true across all races. Obviously, there are national headwinds and tailwinds that may be a factor in most polls, but a race for governor in North Carolina is going to have very different underlying drivers of vote than a race for Senate in the state of Minnesota. And so it is the job of the practitioners to understand what is underneath that, because that is truly how you need to understand the data that you get back. So I have a couple questions that campaigns and certainly campaign pollsters should ask themselves before polling. Some of these, you might read this and say, well, of course. But these are questions that don't often get asked proactively or that the pollster is having to steer people towards. So one, what is the overarching choice we want this race to be about for voters? Because it is candidate A versus candidate B, but it is deeper than that. And there is oftentimes an overarching narrative, and your opponent is going to have their version of that. What do you want that to be, and how are we testing and understanding whether or not that is the choice that voters perceive? Second is, how do these questions give me insight into the larger political landscape? Do they help me understand whether the wind is at my back or in my face? What are the different types of questions that I need to ask to get at that answer? Because again, it's going to help you understand the head-to-head. If you are tied, but the larger atmospherics generally favor your party, you feel better about a tied race. A tied race where you feel like you're walking uphill, you don't feel as good about what that tied race might look like. Will these questions or messages aid in building a path to victory? This is going at the curiosity exercise. It is always going to be interesting to ask a question of an executive order or a newsworthy event or a sort of political scandal. But do those questions actually help you make key decisions on the campaign? How does the data help execute a larger campaign strategy? That can also go to targeting. You can ask a question in a poll that finds that moms who drive SUVs are more likely to vote for your candidate. But if you cannot go reach moms who drive SUVs, then that is a useless data point. It is just there to be an interesting cocktail party conversation. What is the best tool for testing what I want to get out of this? There's polling, there's ad testing, there's focus groups, there's analytics, there's looking at model scores. There are lots of different ways to capture this, and knowing the best tool to use is part of a strategic decision for the campaign. And then I sort of alluded to this already, but can I find these voters in real life? And the other piece is, are there enough of them? Again, you can micro-target your way down to an infinitesimal number of voters. They exist in a poll, you can talk about them in a poll, but if you need to close a 5-point gap and an audience that we're really over-indexing in terms of our emphasis comprises 1% of the electorate, you've got to do better than that. And so not losing sight for the forest through the trees in terms of, do these voters materially give us that win number that we're looking for, is another important question that campaigns should be asking.
Excellent. So I'll go right into questions, and I'm going to start with you, Molly, since you're the last one to speak. Democrats and you have been in the headlines lately for some research that you did that shows Democrats in particularly perilous position right now. So, your data, and you obviously have a lot more knowledge of this, shows Democrats at a low point, and the party being basically a damaged brand right now. As Democrats and as you advise Democrats work their way back, what roles should poll-driven messaging play versus, this goes back to what Michael said, versus in terms of understanding the humanity behind people, versus a more organic testing, refresh, seeing what goes on social media, seeing what draws crowds, seeing what excites people. How can we balance that? How can we balance those two pieces? More of a scientifically, technically sound piece that maybe creates a message that's a little too diffuse versus something that brings passion, but maybe brings some controversy too.
Sure. So the answer is certainly both, and these two things should feed each other, and not in a step one, step two way, but I think more in terms of like a circular churn. So I do think that polling can help you identify who you have problems with. Who are we losing? Who have we lost the most ground with? We have a pretty clear answer to that question. By and large, it tends to be younger voters, communities of color, and more working class voters. Polling is what tells us that. We're not going to figure that out from organic content. It's really important to understand where the trouble spots exist. Polling is going to be critical in that. And then polling is also going to help you diagnose the sort of complexity of the problem. So is it that Democrats are too woke? Is it that Democrats spend too much taxpayer dollars? Is it that Democrats aren't good at getting things done and that it's not about the policies, it's about being able to implement them? Understanding where those different weak parts lie can help those who are then out there creating the organic material and creating, the sort of movement side, have a little bit more insight into addressing some of those core concerns. I think where the polling has limited sort of value in real life is a candidate is a product. A party is part of what they are attached to, but a candidate is going to bring a certain, sort of singular strength to a conversation with voters. And a poll cannot create that. You can do ad tests, you can sort of measure out this works better, getting fired up and yelling is better than sounding muted and wonky, or some of those things to derive some larger lessons. But I do think that in terms of building a connection with the voter out in the real world, that does have to be something that is organic, and that we want to then take what is happening out there, test it and understand what is working and why, to try to come up with some general rules for the road. But I think the problem is oftentimes, you sort of see someone have their viral moment or catch a lot of fire in, a media silo, whether it's social media, all of those different places, podcast world, all of those things, where they find themselves, and then a bunch of people jump on to just try to imitate that. And that is inauthentic at its core. And so the polling should give some guardrails. It should give some keys to understanding what the problem is. And then I do think that individual candidates, campaigns, and all of that need to then sort of build themselves accordingly, but not then all try to be the same thing. Because it always just fails miserably when people all try to be one thing.
Excellent. So I'm going to turn to Wes now and say that, President Trump has said, I've got my polls and my focus groups, they're right here. They're my audience. They're the people I dial, I'd say drunk dial, but he doesn't drink, dial late at night to talk to about these messages. It's what works, it's what's going on social media. And when something catches, I stick with it. Yes. And when something doesn't catch, I don't stick with it. And it means I can move around a little bit, I can be flexible, do the weave. But I would also say that as you get just down one rung, senators, members of Congress, the Republican Party are still, in a lot of ways, old school. Definitely doing poll-driven messaging, definitely sticking to the script with a couple more colorful characters who kind of inevitably lose. But they're still running, I would say, more traditional campaigns.
Yeah.
Looking to the future, is this a thing that President Trump can pull off based on personality, or is there something there that Republicans and even Democrats can carry moving forward when it comes to the question of how you decide how you're going to campaign, how you choose what you're going to look at when you decide on analytics?
Yeah. So I think our company's going to launch a new product, which is we're going to do arena-sized focus groups. No, that's not going to happen. I doubt there's a market for it. It's a great question, and I would start the answer with Trump is one of one. He's in his own category. I don't, and I say that I'm sure there's some others out there that possess the same set of skills and things that he does. But in American politics today, he's one of one. He does, in fact, crowdsource his opinion research. I know. So I started 33 years ago in polling with a little firm called Fabrizio McLaughlin, which was Tony Fabrizio and John McLaughlin. Now, John McLaughlin and his brother Jimmy are now McLaughlin Associates, and Tony is Fabrizio Lee, both of whom were on the campaign, the Trump campaign. So, and we did super PAC work on the outside. But I can tell you that the Trump campaign did a lot of polling, a lot of focus groups, a lot of opinion research in general. It's very difficult to be a pollster in that environment when Donald Trump's your client, because he is interested in polling, but he does his own opinion research and he does it in massive rallies. No, I don't think that is something that's going to outlive him. Probably, it's a unique moment at this particular point in time. I think what makes good opinion research is not going to change because of Donald Trump. What we're trying to find, and the paths that we go down to answer all the questions that Molly put on her slide. By the way, there's not a single thing she put on her slide that I disagree with. I think she did a great job. She talks about the choice that you're trying to get to is the heart of it. We like to say in our firm, the reason that opinion research can't be reduced entirely to numbers is because at the end of the day, the target is the human heart. And the question that we need, when a voter goes to cast their ballot, by whatever means they cast it, we always say, what's the question? What question will their vote answer? And there's a question that belongs to your opponent, and there's a question that belongs to you. Which question are the majority of the voters, 50 plus 1, answering when they cast their ballot? That is a matter of, I say the heart, obviously, I'm not talking biology here, but it is moving 2 steps beyond just the empirical and the intellectual to the emotional. And that's where, to your point, Molly, brilliant point that anyone who ever aspires to be a pollster, please understand why you can't quite get there, and you won't succeed if all you do is read numbers, is because that's not going to ever be insightful enough to understand how to build that question out. I don't think that that's going to change. And I think Donald Trump's very unique way of crowdsourcing research, well, I mean, it works for him, but I don't have many other senatorial candidates or gubernatorial candidates or House or anything that works for him.
Excellent. I've often had conversations with folks, and they're very mad at pollsters. And I think the reason they're mad at pollsters is because here's what people want from pollsters. They want to know the future before it happens. And I say that's sort of between you and your God, not really up to the pollster. But that is, in the end, why people follow polls. They want to be reassured that their thing is going to happen, or they want to be prepared to go to the bunker. Either way, that's just what they want to know. And I turn that to Michael, who actually does something where his job is to predict the future. Which is to say, when you work on an election desk, which is you work at the Fox News election night desk, as do a few other folks who are here, and in addition to the people that supply the data. So your job literally is to help the network say who's going to win before all the data's in. That's why you get those weird, Harris is up by 46 points in Missouri, so we know she's going to lose. But the data that goes in there is a little bit odd. It depends on how people choose to vote, right? So some is the stuff you do on election day where you get people coming out of the poll. Some is mail-in, some is absentee, early voting, et cetera. And those are different between Democrats and Republicans, and they probably vary between Democrats and Republicans depending on the state. So when you, as the fortune teller who has to make a prediction of the future and your job depends on it, how do you deal with some of those different, pieces moment to moment on election night as they come in?
Yeah, this is, I think, the central challenge, certainly of the last 4 years. It remains to be seen how much of a challenge it will be in the next 4. What you're referring to is generally known as partisan vote modality, and it's this idea that people's preference for how they vote is aligned in some way with their partisanship. And we see this trend really open up during the COVID election in 2020, when Democrats are really much more likely to vote by mail, whereas Republicans are more likely to vote in person on election day. And then that early election voting is really, as you said, really conditional on the dynamics of a state. That was a very challenging election to call, because when you're sitting there in front of your screens looking at these models, you're seeing vote. The vote comes in, it hits our models, and our models literally do predict the future, right? They take what is known and they use it to forecast conditional on how we expect turnout to go. They'll forecast a winner. Now, if you expect all of the vote coming in to behave in the same way, carving up a state into its counties, and you believe that the early vote is going to look like the election day vote, none of this is a problem, because vote is vote, and I can just kind of forecast it up to turnout. But when you're looking at vote coming in and you don't know necessarily if this is the mail vote, this is the in-person vote, because that's not usually flagged in our system. So you don't know if you're looking at a heavily Republican vote that's non-representative of the county, or heavily Democratic vote, or something else. And that created a lot of forecasting uncertainty, not just for us, but every network in 2020. And I'm sure that you all remember having to wait until Saturday. And why can't they just call the race? Well, that's why, because we weren't entirely sure what was out in terms of the vote. So we have all streamlined our systems. Every network that makes election forecasts has made tweaks since then. And as you may have noticed, it went a lot smoother for everyone this time. It was also, for other reasons, just an easier race to call. But it's definitely something that we're thinking about. The caveat that I'll add to this, though, is President Trump has changed his messaging on how people vote. I think he recognized correctly, in my view, that really telling Republicans, hey, vote in person on election day probably cost him, I'm not sure if it cost him the election, but it definitely cost him votes, because something can come up on election day. Maybe it's raining, right? And you didn't bank those votes. And so the Republicans have shifted their messaging, and we saw these gaps that existed in 2020 have begun to narrow, I think, as a result. So we may have done all this work for nothing. We'll see.
Excellent. That's definitely not the final message of the panel. Okay, so for the biggest nerds and losers who follow politics, there's a couple elections coming up next week. Mm-hmm. There is a Wisconsin State Supreme Court election, which will determine the balance of power in Wisconsin, which has implications for redistricting and other issues. There are two House races in Florida, one of which are special elections, one of which is considered to be potentially competitive. I'm going to turn to Molly and then Wes. I don't know if you're actually working on those races. Are you?
No.
Okay, good. Tell me what this week looks like as the pollster, and tell me the best parts about it and the worst parts about it from polling.
If I was the pollster.
If you were the pollster, what does that week look like?
Yeah, I mean, you're done polling at this point, right? You are just kind of waiting to see what happens. So in that way, it's easy because the work is done. But I think the uncertainty around these special elections is who is going to vote. And it really has moved over time since 2017 that Democrats tend to do better in lower turnout elections. There's been sort of a realignment that I think most people in this room are likely familiar with, where it used to be that low turnout elections were better for Republicans because Republicans were more educated, more informed, higher income, had more flexibility to go vote on a random special election day, knew the election was coming up. But those same voters have sort of shifted in their partisan identity and affiliation, tend to be more Democratic. I think that getting that special electorate right, though, in your polls is the challenge, because special elections are not primaries that are always in August of the election year, and you know who a primary voter is, you can sort of find them. You know who's going to vote in general elections, especially midterms. Presidentials, when you have more churn in the electorate, can be more difficult. But what I would be thinking if I'm the pollster going into this is, was my anticipation of turnout relative to other elections correct? And was that favoring Democrats, as it historically has, or are we in a moment where the party brand is weak, Democrats are demoralized, Republicans are sort of on a high, and they're more willing to go out and sort of spike more wins? And that, to me, is what I'm wondering going into these elections, are the past trends that we've seen indicative of a permanent sort of shift, or were those sort of energetically counters to Trump, Democrats more enthusiastic, and we're on the other side of that, at least temporally?
And are there indicators that you can get in the last few days from, reports of turnout?
No. Not reliable ones.
So the things that, oh my God, look
Yes.
how busy it is here.
I mean, I spend more time in the lead up to any election telling people that early reports of this many people voted early, or this many people have turned in the ballot, or the line is really long here, is bad data. It is just not, we won Texas, I think, based on early reports in 2020, because we couldn't believe the lines and the turnout. And so you never know what somebody's decision to vote early is versus on election day and wait in a long line, and you don't know who else is out there who's not doing that or making another decision. And so I constantly am urging caution against, sort of using data to approximate the future, to your point. They want everybody wants the sort of early data to predict the future, and I think we're wrong more often than we're right.
Yeah, but I was at the gym and I heard that.
Yeah, that's true. I was really excited about turnout in Detroit.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, once again, I'm struck by the fact that there's a whole lot that Molly and I agree on. We could get into the stuff we disagree on, but I think when it comes to the art and science of polling, we probably are much more in agreement than not. So yes, you asked the question. I do work for several of the organizations, the super PACs that Elon Musk funds. I also do work for Wisconsin Manufacturing and Chamber, who's very much involved in that race. I'm also Jimmy Petronis's pollster in Florida 1. So, no, I don't have polling in the last 5 days. And you're going to be like, what, you do it? Why not? Well, because that's where the public sources do polling, focused almost entirely on the horse race. At this point, for us to take another poll, it is just to know. We've already taken a number of polls, and we have set our strategy, and so every dollar from this point on goes to voter contact of one form or another. And usually it's like, yeah, we're not taking a poll in the last week. That would simply be a luxury to know. And if you have a self-funder who wants to do that, then sure. But outside of that, no, we don't. To your point about early indicators, absentee ballot request, et cetera, notoriously bad indicators. And you end up making predictions you regret if you do that. As to what's happening in both those cases, Wisconsin's is a little bit unique, and I put that in a different category from Florida, the two specials in Florida. And I would say in Wisconsin, the race started out almost as an attempted repeat of the Supreme Court race 2 years ago in Wisconsin, where the Democrats focused very heavily on abortion. And look, I happen to be of the opinion, I think I can prove it empirically, that when Roe was kicked to the curb by the Dobbs decision, that took what should have been a very good cycle for Republicans in 2022 midterm and muted it significantly. There's no question. I'm a pro-life pollster. I admit that right up front, that it absolutely did. And when I say this, I'm not attacking Democrats really. Both sides do this. When we find something that works, then the answer is do it again and again until it stops working, and then move on. It's kind of an interesting thing. We saw that in the 24 elections, that it was like, well, it didn't work quite as well, and Democrats started to shift off that. Then you go to the Wisconsin race, and it was like, we're going to make this all about abortion. Then the Democrat, Judge Crawford, has moved away from that and moved into other things because they see the same polling we do, which is to say it is a very powerful issue still, and it will be probably the rest of our lives, but it doesn't hold, it's not as vote determinative right now as it was just a few years ago. So that race is interesting. 2 years ago, there was a massive lopsidedness of spending, and the conservative judge lost significantly. I have the race tied. If you put a gun to my head and said, make a decision right now, yeah, I'm going to tell you it's a close win or loss. If I had to choose right now, my clients are not in the room. I'd say we could come up a little short. I don't think we're coming up 5, 4, maybe even 3 points short.
And what about the Florida one? You're not.
Well, Florida one. So Florida, the two Florida specials, I'd say, is a little bit different. There is sort of the money primary, and by that I mean when you start looking specifically at low dollar giving, you would see that a good indication, which is true, that the Democrat base wakes up every morning with their hair on fire right now. And our base wakes up fat and happy, doom scrolling memes of angry liberals. I'm like, okay, that's not real helpful for a special election.
For fundraising.
Fundraising or getting people out to vote in a special election. And I think Florida 6 is very tight. I know Tony Fabrizio has data out there that suggests that. I'm not polling Florida 6. Both these districts are overwhelmingly Republican, and in both cases, the Republican candidate should win by 10 plus points. I think that we'll come close to that in Florida 1. Maybe it'll not quite 10. But I feel pretty good about Jimmy Petronis winning. I don't know what's going to happen in Florida 6. Again, That would be a bit of a canary in the coal mine in terms of intensity and motivation, because both of those districts are overwhelmingly red and should be easy. So if we lose 6, that's a wake-up call for sure.
Unless you're here to predict the future,
Oh,
so
boy.
what are you doing? Michael, I'm going to turn to you a little bit, and I know that you're not a pollster, but I'm sure in your classes polling comes up all the time with your students. And my question, so we've talked to folks who could be employers of potential graduates of this program. You could be a supplier of people who might join this program. What excites them the most when it comes to politics and data? And the answer cannot be nothing. It has, when they think about it, where do they get, where does that tie to passion beyond just, I love numbers and want to work with numbers all day?
That's an interesting question. Several of my students are in the room. We could
Excellent.
probably just ask them. I think what we're seeing right now, I think the politics of our typical politics of our students are fairly known, so they tend to gravitate toward the Democratic Party, and I think there is very much the feeling that Wes just described, kind of a general gnashing of teeth and a feeling like this right now we're sort of out of control, and the question I keep hearing again and again is, what can I do? Right, and I think what I've heard from my fellow panelists here really do tell us regardless of which party you're gravitating towards, what you can do. You can ask smart questions, and you cannot forget that, as we've heard twice now, there are people that underlie these data points, and I think the way out for folks is really using data to get these key insights to build kind of the way forward. I mean, I know that I'm giving you talking points here because I'm reasoning this through myself, but I think using data to get to figure out how we can get back to bread and butter issues and talk about issues that really matter to people, I think is definitely something that I've heard from some of the people sitting over here that they're very interested in doing.
We're just finishing up. If you have questions from the audience, Robert is going to go around right now with cards, and you have to write them down. We're not doing microphones today, so he'll pass around cards real quick. And while we're doing that, I have a question for everybody, which is to say, so President Trump's administration is doing things that would make Bernie Sanders blush. Things like saying, we're not going to pay pharmaceutical companies full price, and we're going to set up price controls for pharmaceutical companies. We are not going to allow SNAP payments to go to junk food. And there's a few other examples of this where literally, if any Democrat had even thought about pushing this forward, it would have become national headlines. Can this type of issue positioning and staking out these kinds of issues that are to the left of the left, in addition to issues that are on the right of the right, be sustained?
Yeah.
And if not, what is it that we know from opinion research that would show that this is something that might fall apart? I'll start with you, Wes.
Yeah, I'm going to give you start with the real simple answer. Yes. The realignment of the Republican Party is something that is just shocking to me. I've been doing this for 33 years, but I have studied it extensively, and I understand what's underneath of it. And the moniker that's been slapped on it is conservative populism. And, I think that does work to some degree, although it doesn't tell the whole story, obviously. And we have become a bluer collar-ish party. My firm is working for the Teamsters. I never thought I'd ever say that, but we are.
Is your firm organizing?
We're not organizing. We don't have that specialty.
That'll be the day.
But what is happening in American politics, if you want to understand what's happening, then try to figure out why. And the why actually starts many years ago. And I'm sure, look, we're in Columbia. Academics could write books on this. I'm not going to do it, but someone should. The why really starts, in the 70s, probably with Watergate, and with some exceptions along the way, a continued slide in terms of trust of the American voter in our political institutions. It has, with some bumps upward at times, sure, but that chart goes one direction, and that has. People ask, is it true that Donald Trump created conservative populism? Well, obviously, I'm a fan, and I've done a lot of work for him, but the answer is no. He saw the wave. He saw it much clearer than most people did, and waxed up the surfboard and got on it. And I think that wave also breaks both ways. I think that there is an iteration of that makes sense for the Democrats, and I'm not a Democrat, so it's not for me to try to tell them what it is. But it's either figure out how to get on it or get crushed by it. What's underneath of that? This doesn't work anymore. What's underneath the realignment beyond that is, and you see this we've seen it in countless focus groups for 10 years. And it's only grown and built and built and built. And that is among Republican, especially our newer pieces, Hispanics, a growing percentage of African Americans, especially younger black males. I'd really put that cutoff at 50 and under, where we made the real grounds. And Gen Z, and no, the majority of Gen Z still leans Democrat, but surprising number coming our way, a surprising chunk, and that looks like it's growing to me. It is the sense that the system that they've been given doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. We hear about the hollowing out of American middle class. And it is the sense that the left has become the party of the elites. And that, yes, the billionaire from Queens is the anti-elitist. That sounds crazy, but it's true. And that's what the populism really is. And very much part of that is the America First agenda. Okay, I want the American dream that my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents had. And I think I'm owed that, and I want our leaders to say, no, we're putting America's interests first above all else. Mm-hmm. Those are the whys behind the populist resurgence. Who's captured that energy better than anybody else right now? Well, Trump has. But that energy is available. That's sort of open market.
Right. So same question to you, Molly. As you see, obviously, 90, 95, 99% of what, Trump and his folks are doing goes directly. I mean, basically, it seems that their governing ethos is troll the liberals, quote unquote, whatever that means. But also doing some things that have been on, and also including looking at the military in a very tough way. Does that steal thunder from Democrats, or does it create, as Wes says, maybe an opportunity to reposition and think about that?
Well, first, I'm going to say, Wes, I don't appreciate you making me think about Donald Trump on a surfboard. Just didn't need that image.
Never going to leave your mind.
In my head. I agree. So I think everything Wes said about the sort of underlying sense, especially with younger people, about broken institutions, and Democrats have become, in some ways for voters as a party, not every individual within it, the defenders of broken institutions. And what Trump has done very effectively is be the disruptor of all of that. And I think he has seized that in ways that Bernie Sanders also has been able to do, but Sanders has not taken hold of the party in the way that Trump was able to do. And so I do agree that I think it is less about partisanship and more about who can sort of come in and authentically represent this disruption. Where I disagree on some of the populist policies, sort of like creating a shift in realignment, is how much political will Donald Trump has to those things versus tax cuts for the wealthy and sort of anti-populist policies that also can come along with it. And I think Trump talks the talk very well, and things like cutting SNAP for junk food, standing up to pharma, all of those things are things that, if executed, are a real win for Republicans generally to sort of realign. I am probably more skeptical than Wes is, because I think Trump is one of one, and Trump is able to do that, and Trump is able to be the bull in the china shop with all of the special interests who are typically aligned behind Republicans. And I don't know that I think the House caucus and Senate caucus on the Republican side have the same political flexibility to do it. And so I don't know that I see this coming to fruition. If it does, I feel differently. So I sort of look at that a little bit differently. And I do think where Democrats have to be is, one, you can be a reformer and not want to burn down all the things Trump wants to burn down, right? But I think there does have to be real reform language from Democrats that is not out there right now. And we've been reflexively, whatever Trump says, we take the opposite view. Even when Trump says things that we historically have believed or like fought for, we can't do that anymore. We have to be able to like exist in that nuance. And then I think the second piece is pulling out the real and meaningful ways that, even though Trump's rhetoric supports this conservative populism, many of the policies, if this budget goes through, will go against some of that. And I think like taking that on and challenging that is difficult because they have a leader who is powerful and compelling, and we are a leaderless party right now. So, that sort of ability to shout at equal decibels is hard, but I think that's what has to happen.
So I've got some great questions from the audience. We don't have time for all of them, but I'll start with the first one, which is an interesting one. So Trump sued Ann Selzer after her poll came out, saying it was inaccurate. Should pollsters be concerned? And given all the things that the Trump administration has done around, types of professional service industries that you wouldn't expect, should you be concerned about being sued or legal liability, or from a business perspective? And I guess this is mostly for Molly, but also for Wes to some extent too, about your business. And I'm not suggesting that you're only in this for maintaining a business, but you have to maintain clients. And just to go a step further, even more realistically saying, any, association or company that hires Molly Murphy or whoever else is banned from my office. Just tell me about what you might think about to navigate that.
Yeah, I am concerned. I think it's right to be concerned. I don't know that there's enough to say, here are the 3 things to be concerned about and here's what to do about them, but I don't think there's all the evidence in the world to say there's an instinct for litigiousness that has gone beyond what has happened in the past. Whether it's going to go down to the micro level of this firm worked for Kamala Harris and therefore, I don't know the answer. But I think it would be impractical to assume that we're in normal times when it comes to this, because thus far it doesn't seem like we are. I'm not specifically worried about being sued for inaccuracy in polls or releasing a public poll that says something and then the election results say otherwise. I think it's more the sort of strategic partnerships that are geared towards like overall wins and losses. And I think sometimes it's less about, I think it's more to jam up firms and render them more paralyzed or, cautious about who they take on. I think having talked to partners who do more sort of corporate and issue space rather than political space, I think they've seen a sort of like shrinkage of clients, but sometimes that just happens honestly, like corporate firms want to work with the winning party. Yeah. And that's been true. That was true for, Biden era and all of that. So it's hard to say, is it because these corporations are fearful of an association with a democratically aligned firm? Maybe, but it's not, I don't think it's as clear. But yeah, I think it's reasonable to be concerned.
Okay, and same question for you, because before Trump beat Democrats, he beat Republicans, and he wasn't that nice to the people that were fighting against him.
Now, a couple things on that. I probably would say am I concerned about the general growing litigious nature of business in America? Yes, I am. As it relates to Trump, not particularly, but to Molly's point, again, been doing it for 33 years. On the corporate side, when the other side takes over the White House, your corporate business shrinks a little bit. And when your side takes over the White House, it grows. Why? Because corporate America goes and looks for, hey, do you speak that language? Interpret for me. So right now we're in a spot which I'm old enough to know will only last for a season. But it's like, hey, grab up, I'm on my side, grab up all the corporate work you can get because everybody's knocking on the door. Who speaks Trump? We need somebody who can interpret for us. That wanes with that. Am I worried about the enemies of, I can't speak, I've never worked in Democrat politics, but I have my whole career in Republican politics. If you work for the other for a different team who doesn't win the White House, typically on the Republican side, you might be in the wilderness a little bit for a year or two. Is that exacerbated under Trump? A little bit. I mean, the various firms that did work for Ron DeSantis, they're probably going to have, I don't think they're going bankrupt, but they're going to have a little bit weaker election cycle than maybe they did last time.
Who's the person that was banished to the wilderness? What's his name from Florida?
Oh, I'm not sure which one you're speaking of, but yeah, it's, look, I mean, if you're Jeff Rowe's company, I'm not attacking his company, who led the DeSantis effort, yeah, the president knows your name and doesn't like you, so he'll go make a bunch of corporate money and he'll survive, but and he'll be back. I guarantee it. But he has to wait a couple of years for that to.
All right. I think last question. We can get right into the details here. Reaching voters has become incredibly difficult, especially by phone, and especially at smaller political geography. Yeah. We always talk about the presidency, but right now you're talking about a special election. At least in Wisconsin, it's statewide. Talking about a special election in a congressional district where no one really knows what congressional district they live in.
No.
How do you do this? And is there a point at which you say it's just too expensive or just isn't that feasible? And how about West Tamale?
Okay.
Michael, you can think about it from a...
I'll give you, I'll try to be really brief on this, but this could go for hours. And it's really a methodological question. The most, and Molly may disagree, I'm sure she'll say so if she does. The most accurate form of data collection still today is live caller ambushing you at dinner time on your cell phone, predominantly, since landlines are quickly vanishing. But if you think that the inflation of the last few years has impacted your personal life, just wait till you see what it's done to live caller. Yeah. Holy mackerel! It's it's a tripling almost of hard costs for us. So live caller is pricing itself out of existence. Not entirely. We do a lot of live caller, but it's getting more and more expensive. In that context, everybody's trying to come up. You hear the term in polling mixed mode. All right, we're going to do a third of it live caller, and we're going to do a third of it text to web, and we're going to do a third of it web-based. And web-based is really email sample. What that really is an attempt to meet the market price demands and to find a way to do it as accurately as possible. I think that there are huge methodological problems in that everybody's trying to grapple with, some more successfully than others. We invested about $1 million in building our own text-to-web program that tries to, I think we've done a pretty good job of it, mitigate many of the problems that are inherent in text-to-web. That shows some promise. The robocall IVR has more or less is vanishing because it's showing less and less.
Question that was in here, perfect.
Okay, that's vanishing. You would absolutely need a change in federal communications law to bring that back, where you could remove the need for a human being to make the final call digit on it on the call.
Okay, I'm going to take moderator privilege right now and change the question because this is one that I think people want to know and one you're probably being asked all the time. How are you using AI in the work that you're doing? And besides changing your website to say we use AI-powered work, as everyone does. And are any things going to go extinct within research as a result of AI? So I want to change, it's really important. We only have a couple of minutes, but I'll go across. And Michael, think about it in terms of the exit poll. So let's go across.
I'll be very quick. We're still figuring out the best ways to fully integrate AI. Right now, we do it for very, sort of simple things like coding our open-ended data. It's very good at that. Saves us a lot of staff resource time.
It does.
We don't do things like AI writing questionnaires. We still use people to do that, although that's a growing, sort of option, at least in sort of your core structure of what you want, even if we are then writing the messages. We're not there yet. People are developing, and there's like, I'm doing webinars to figure out what it means, is like creating the sort of template of a swing voter, so that instead of actually talking to swing voters, you talk to a bot that's an AI creation of a swing voter. We are not using any of those things. We're still using it for fairly simple, almost administrative tasks. And I think it will make a lot of entry-level jobs in polling extinct or shrink. I mean, a lot of the jobs in polling and how I started was going through and proofing the crosstabs and making a lot of charts and filling in, relevant data with subgroups. I think those things are all going to go away. And that is, the sort of, we are not just looking at numbers. And I think the fear I have in some ways is, how do you strike the balance of this isn't just about number means this, but also being more thoughtful in how it integrates into a larger campaign. And like the junior process of climbing up is just going to change in that, to help people learn how to be pollsters, when a lot of the ladder climbing work will be taken over by AI.
Great. Some of us started by faxing top line results to people. So.
Yes.
Okay, we've got about 60 seconds. So Michael, real quick, and then to you, West.
I think for us, the most promising avenue to explore is looking for ways to understand correlations that we haven't thought of, in terms of when the dust settles on the East Coast in House races, Senate races. Can we find patterns that predict, things that in House races out west that we might look for to call? So that outside of the typical things that we might describe as AI, even if they're not really, like machine learning and whatnot, I think that's the most promising thing for us.
Excellent.
There are some groups that have talked about doing AI live caller, meaning you're not talking to a human being, you're talking to a AI-generated voice that sounds remarkably like a live caller, and using that for data collection. I don't think that's going to happen. I know the folks, some very intelligent folks who are in the AI space trying to do that, are running into all sorts of problems and say we're not quite there. Secondly, I believe that you would quickly have a bipartisan bill in both the House and the Senate to kill it. And it doesn't have to do with opinion research, it has to do with telemarketing. And I think we will likely see bipartisan acceptance of a regulatory environment that says you cannot call cell phones with AI. We'll see, but it hasn't happened yet.
Excellent. Let's have a round of applause for our panelists.